Good morning, and to our friends joining us abroad, good evening. Welcome to Mirage Talks. Today, we welcome Clinical Assistant Professor and the Associate Director at the Strauss Center of Yeshiva University, the talented Neil Rogacheski, to touch on the important topic of the Israeli independence. Neil, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Delighted to be here with all of you. As a frequent visitor to Orange County, I've long appreciated the outstanding work of the Mirage Institute in many domains, but especially in strengthening economic ties between Israel and the United States. So I'm especially honored to be a part of this series. Glancing at the list of speakers within the series, I see that most Israel-centered talks have focused on the extraordinary run of economic and business developments within Israel in recent decades. This talk will be a little different, as I hope to take you on a tour of the founding principles of Israel, which in turn requires we take a bit of a history lesson, a historical look back at those heady days in the spring and summer of 1948, exactly 75 years ago. But I do think that a study of the founding of Israel is also very helpful as we try to understand and perhaps participate in Israel's culture of entrepreneurship and risk-taking that the Mirage Institute has done so much to advance in recent years. On December 12th, 2022, an 11-story banner depicting Israel's Declaration of Independence appeared on the side of an office tower in Tel Aviv's City Hall complex. Explaining the municipality's decision to put it there, Tel Aviv Mayor Ron Huldai said simply, "This is our way, and these are our values." The banner has been there ever since. Recently, the Technion, the University of Science and Technology in Israel, similarly unveiled a giant version of the text of Israel's Declaration of Independence over its main building. If you walk around Israel these days, virtually anywhere you'll go, you'll run into the text of the Declaration. There'll be ceremonial signings on the streets, various cities around Israel as part of the protest movement that has been going on for almost a year at this point. Yair Lapid, leader of the opposition, summed up the protest movement by stating, "We are fighting for the values of the Declaration of Independence," and he and others have floated using Israel's Declaration of Independence as a constitution for the state of Israel. Famously, Israel has no constitution. We can talk about that a little bit in the Q&A as well, if you like. So the Declaration has been everywhere, more so than ever in Israeli history. The opposition to the current government has made it a rallying cry, but it's not as if the pro-government side has been opposed to Israel's Declaration of Independence. Indeed, what we can see in Israel over the last year is that a consensus has emerged, a new consensus that Israel's Declaration of Independence matters. So what is this? So Israel's declaration is everywhere. The text that David Ben-Gurion proclaimed upon Israel's founding, May 14th, 1948, is best remembered in contemporary Israel for two things. First, its stirring crescendo, quoting in the English, "By virtue of our natural and historical right, and on the strength of the resolutions of the United Nations General Assembly, we hereby declare the establishment of a Jewish state in Eretz Yisrael to be known as the State of Israel." That's part one. And part two, what also is known as and what's been invoked endlessly in recent months, the State of Israel will be based on freedom, justice, and peace as envisioned by the prophets of Israel. It will ensure equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. It will guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, language, education, and culture. It will safeguard the holy places of all religions, and it'll be faithful to the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. So this paragraph has been, these two stirring paragraphs, like beautifully moving, have been invoked all the time in Israel, but they've rarely been studied. And so one could ask, one hears all the time, what are the values? These are the values. Our values as Israelis are found in the Declaration of Independence, but what are the values of the Declaration of Independence? Why do they matter? How do they come about? What do they tell us about the character of the state of Israel at its founding moment in 1948? And what are their relevance today? These are the questions that my colleague Dov Ziegler and I take up in our recent book, Israel's Declaration of Independence. I think some of you will be lucky, thanks to the generosity of Mirage Institute, to receive a copy. So what I want to do in the time we have this morning, this afternoon, this evening, is to give a brief tour of what I consider the core values. Actually prefer the term the core principles of Israel's Declaration of Independence. And to sum up, just to lay my cards on the table at one, I'll say as follows. Israel's Declaration of Independence boldly proclaims that the state of Israel will be a Jewish state, capaciously defined, a free state, or a liberal state, or a state of rights of all of its inhabitants. Pick your favorite version of that, but a free state or a liberal state, and a strong state, an independent state, simply a state that will act independently a world of states like all other states, but will be tasked with protecting both the Jewish and the free character of the state. And it boldly, I think, quite boldly and dramatically, which makes it, so relevant for our time, calls on Israelis and others to harmonize these elements so that the things they have in common, the Jewish element, the democratic or the free, the rights-giving element, will harmonize or reinforce one another, that their similarities will be stronger than their differences. That is, to sum up, the teaching of Israel's Declaration of Independence. So what I want to do briefly, and then we can talk, in the Q&A about any aspect. We can talk about the text of the Declaration of Independence. We can talk about Ben-Gurion. We can talk about the history of Israel's founding in 1948. We can talk about contemporary Israeli politics, a protest movement, really anything. But what I briefly want to do is I want to go through what I consider these three pillars of Israel's Declaration of Independence. Namely, it's teaching on the nature of sovereignty, what it means to be a state. Pillar one. Pillar two is religion and state. What does it mean when Israel is called a Jewish state in its Declaration of Independence? And three, rights. What does a Declaration of Independence mean when it speaks about the rights of the social and political rights of the citizens? And what does this tell us about the relationship between the Jewish and democratic character of the state? Finally, I'll say a few words about why I think the Declaration is so important today, and will remain important as we try to navigate the really unprecedented crisis which Israel seems to be facing. Okay, first, so what's the Israel's Declaration of Independence position on sovereignty? This is a clear and unambiguous statement that the Jewish state is going to be an independent state. It's not going to be dependent on the United Nations. It will very soon after 1948, it will construct strong and durable and helpful alliances with various countries. It will construct alliances, but it will rely on itself. It will be a fully independent state existing in a world of states like all other states. It's a clear and unambiguous statement of state sovereignty. This is expressed in that phrase that I read just a moment ago, that the Jews have a natural right, the word of in the language of the Declaration, natural right of the Jewish people to be masters of their own fate, like all other nations, in their own sovereign state. Now, this phrase, introduced and written by David Ben-Gurion, the indispensable founder of Israel, declares a sovereign state. It assumes that states are definitionally sovereign, and it assumes that Israel is not going to be dependent on any international body. It's not going to ask permission. It's going to act like a free and independent state. Now, to all of us, especially Americans, this sounds in a way self-evident, right? Americans, we recall that, quite unsurpassed assertion on the nature of state sovereignty at the end of America's Declaration of Independence. The American Declaration says as follows about what states are. Free and independent states have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all other acts and things which independent states may have right to. This is a clear statement of the American mind. America, we're an independent state. We're not deferring to international bodies. We decide on ourselves the crucial questions of life and death, of war and peace, of economic matters, of all matters. This is we're going to be a sovereign. We're going to be fundamentally independent. So it sounds in a way obvious to us, but this was hardly obvious, either theoretically or politically, in the spring of 1948 to the Jews of Palestine. Ben-Gurion, in his memoirs, would later say that the key question The key political question in 1948 was how far Israel's declaration of independence would follow the procedure which had been set forward by the United Nations for the birth of the new states in Palestine, or to what extent it would say, forget about the process, forget about the procedure, we're going to simply declare a state, we're not going to listen to what the UN wants us to do. So this requires, I'll just go a little bit into the history, but this requires a bit of a history lesson. What Ben-Gurion did was he said, okay, the UN principle matters. The UN in November 29, 1947, votes in full General Assembly for the partition of Palestine into a Jewish state, an Arab state, and international Jerusalem. That's how it's often remembered today. But at the same time, the UN said, this is just the beginning. Once the British leave, the British had ruled Palestine since World War I. We, the UN, we're going to be there. We're going to be there to ensure that there's peace. We're going to be there to ensure that both sides are, trading with one another, that there's economic union between all the bodies. We're going to be there to make sure that there's peace throughout the Middle East. And we're going to be watching over these new political bodies, this Jewish state to come into being, this Arab state to come into being, to make sure that they follow the processes and procedures which we, the UN, are setting forward in this resolution 181, November 29th, 1947. So, of course, that never happened. The resolution was passed right away. The Jews, the mainstream Jewish leadership of in Palestine accepts the resolution. They accept the partition plan. The Arab states, as well as the Palestinian Arabs, reject this out of hand. The War of Independence begins. There are attacks on the Jews. UN resolution, the Jews defend themselves. The War of Independence basically begins right after this resolution is passed. So UN resolution is a dead letter. The war began, and it was clear to the brightest minds on the ground in Palestine that if Israel was going to succeed, it wasn't going to be according to the text of UN resolution. It was going to be whether they could defend themselves in this epic battle, this epic war, which was to begin. Nonetheless, this UN resolution retained extraordinary international importance, diplomatic importance. In the United States, the US had supported the partition plan just as the Soviet Union had done. But over the course of early 1948, as the war raged in Palestine, they got cold feet. George Marshall, Secretary of State, the CIA, the new State Department, all were trying to backtrack on America's commitment to Jewish independence. And some of the Jewish diplomats said, okay, we see this, we see what's going on, therefore we have to, if we're going to proclaim independence, we can't simply declare independence right now. This is too shaky diplomatically. Let's declare a kind of partial independence. Let's declare independence in line with a United Nations-led process. And then later on, maybe we can declare full sovereignty. And so what happened was, in the days leading up to British departure, May 14th, 1948, basically the Zionist leadership was divided into two camps. On one side, which was led by Moshe Shertak, later Sharet, who was to be the second prime minister of Israel, he advocated to his colleagues that, look, we can't go all the way here. We can't declare full independence. The Americans aren't going to like it. The United Nations is not going to like it. If we do this, we're going to lose all support. We need to declare independence in a tenuous fashion. Let's declare a kind of partial independence, and maybe we can declare independence later on. On the other side, there was a camp led by David Ben-Gurion, with a great assist from another future prime minister, Golda Meir, who said, no, this is our moment. We have to go all the way. The United Nations process is a dead letter. The Arabs launched a war against us. We accepted the partition plan. This was roundly rejected, so we can't commit ourselves to any UN process, which is a dead letter. This is a moment where there's a complete and utter void of politics, void of political sovereignty in the land, and we have to seize the opportunity. Now, they were very careful to say that this doesn't mean we can't negotiate, that there won't be a peace settlement, that we won't withdraw from territories depending on how things shake out, as indeed happened. But Ben-Gurion at this moment took it upon himself to say, no, this is our moment. We're going to be an actually independent state. We're not going to declare a state in line with the United Nations. We're going to be fully political. We're seizing our moment. This is our day. This is our moment to join the world of states. And Ben-Gurion expressed it in this really immortal phrase: "We're going to be. This is the natural right, zchut tevit, in the Hebrew, to be masters of one's own fate, like all other nations." Now, so this was a clear success of Israel's declaration of independence. And Israel, one can criticize it, one can praise it for this element. It has always acted in this way. We're a sovereign state. We take care of ourselves. We accept that there's going to be a world of states. Yes, there's the United Nations. Yes, there are international treaties. Yes, there are all these sorts of things which we can engage, but we engage them on our own terms, just like any other country would. And this was just a remarkable achievement. I say it wasn't politically obvious based on this situation on the ground at the time, which I just laid out with the UN, the United States, other political actors, but it also wasn't theoretically obvious at the time. There was a movement in Judaism at the time, in Jewish Palestine at the time, which was hostile to politics. This was a side of the Jewish tradition. Oh, politics is ugly. If you're in politics, you're making ugly compromises, you're getting your hands dirty. Judaism is about standing above politics, of keeping your hands clean, of avoiding the ethical compromises which come up in politics. That was an extraordinary tendency in Judaism at the time, and indeed stretching back, for many centuries before that. But this was a decisive rejection of that. This was a Zionist break. It was accepting of, we're living in a world of politics. We're going to accept the responsibilities. We're going to accept the moral ambiguities and also the moral grandeur and possibilities of living politically. So that was its teaching on sovereignty. We're going to be a strong state. And indeed, this is defined, other than you could say an extreme far left on one side, who reject, in Israel, reject the world of politics, and extreme, you could say far right, ultra Orthodox side, who are also, in a way reject politics. This has been like a defining part of Israel's soul. We're going to be political. We're going to be a state. We're going to defend ourselves in the world of state. We're going to do so much. We're going to try to be strong economically, as the Mirage Institute has tried to advance. So this has been part of the Israeli soul. So that's, I would say, one of the three core pillars of the declaration. The second, I would say, is religion and state. So that's one, sovereignty. Now, second, Jewish state, religion and state. What does this mean? That Israel's declaration says that Israel will be a Jewish state. This, again, written by David Ben-Gurion, and so much of what Israel became and what it expresses in declaration, it owes to that really unrivaled in the 20th century political mind in the Israeli context. It owes to what he wrote and what he said. So Ben-Gurion wrote by himself this first paragraph of Israel's declaration, which goes as follows. Again, in the official English translation: Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, was the birthplace of the Jewish people. Here, their spiritual, religious, and political identity was shaped. Here, they first attained to statehood, created cultural treasures of national and universal significance, and gave to the world the eternal book of books. So in writing this beautiful paragraph, what Ben-Gurion did was he knew that the declaration of of a Jewish state had to say something about Jewish ideas and Jewish principles. The state that was to be created couldn't simply be another secular state, right? That somehow the world of Jewish ideas, Jewish principles would have to inform the life of the state, even though it would not control the state. And what he says is that somehow Jewish ethics, Jewish ideas, the principles that come out of the Bible, the dignity of human beings, the rights of all human beings are created in the image of God, and the like, somehow these Jewish principles would inform the state, even though the state itself would just be another state, that there wasn't going to be a state of Jewish law on one hand, with Jewish rules and regulations controlling the operations of government. So it's not Jewish at that level. But on the other hand, it's not simply a secular state. No, somehow the world of Jewish ideas, of Jewish principles, which come out of the world of the Bible, will somehow influence the life of the state. The state will aspire to Jewish ethics, to righteousness, to justice, which, according to Ben-Gurion, as he later said, what it informs not only the task of the Jewish people, but is universal. The significance of these, as he says, universal. So it's not simply for one people. The Jews have a mission to spread out, to disseminate these ethical principles, but they don't belong to them. So it has this universal aspect to it. So this, I think, is a really Ben-Gurion had a difficult challenge here. As I said, he couldn't say nothing about the connection of the Jewish people to Jewish ideas, as some of his colleagues want. The labor, we can talk about this if you're interested in it. The labor Zionists who wrote the previous drafts of Israel's declaration said absolutely nothing about Jewish ethics, about the Jewish heritage, Jewish ideas. They literally were silent about it. But Ben-Gurion knew he had to say more. He knew he had to say something about how the Jewish heritage and its contributions to humanity, and not simply the Jewish people, would have something of a defining role in the state. So he knew he'd had to have that. On the other hand, he knew that different people have different ideas as to what that means, that this is going to be pluralistically understood, that there's not going to be Jewish law. People can follow Jewish law in the Jewish state, but the state is not going to be controlled by Jewish law. And different Jews are going to have different opinions as to what Jewish ideas are, and they're going to be non-Jews in the state as well. It's going to be a state for everyone, so it cannot simply be a state of Jewish law. So this was sort of a beautiful middle way that he thread, and I think is actually still very helpful for us today. Also, that it's not, Israel today can't simply be Silicon Valley on the Mediterranean or Orange County on the Mediterranean, even though it can be inspired, I think, from many aspects of Orange County. The nicer parts of Israel indeed do look like Orange County, not as nice, but something like that. So it can be inspired by business culture, but it also has to aspire to fulfill an ethical mission, and somehow that those principles, Jewish ideas, have to find a home in the state, but not exclusively. While at the same time, and indeed, Jewish ideas, we'll get to this in a second. Jewish ideas proclaim that all people have dignity. All people have rights. We accept minority rights in Israel not as a deviation from Jewish ideas, but as an expression of Jewish ideas. That's something of what I think is expressed here. So that's pillar 2, right? Jewish state capaciously defined. Finally, a state of rights. This is what's been quoted all the time in recent months in the protest movement. What I read at the beginning, let me read that paragraph again. The state of Israel will be open for Jewish immigration and for the ingathering of the exiles, foster the development of the country for the benefit of all its inhabitants, be based on freedom, justice, and peace as envisioned by the prophets of Israel. It will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. It will guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, language, education, culture, safeguard the holy places of all religions, and be faithful to the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. Now, this language actually, so there's a bit of irony here. People are parading this all the time in contemporary Israel. This language was basically borrowed from what the United Nations had asked for new states to express in the wake of World War II. That language was a lot of this, obviously not the vision of the prophets, but in general, this language. But interestingly, Ben-Gurion, in taking this paragraph, he did something very interesting. He made one small edit to this text, which I think brought Israel's declaration closer to the American idea expressed in America's Declaration of Independence of the inherent natural rights of individuals. So the previous drafts had said that the state will bestow rights, in the Hebrew ta'anik, rights on individuals, as if the state had the power, like divine right of kings, or like Stalin's dream to simply grant rights when it wants to and take away rights. So that the state was this all-powerful thing which could dispense rights whenever it wanted. No, Ben-Gurion got rid of that language, and he said the state will ensure, tekayem in the Hebrew, grant, or literally make manifest rights. As he said to his colleagues as he made that edit in the day before independence, we can't say that the state will grant rights. No, the rights belong to people. The rights belong to people, he says in this immortal phrase in debate with colleagues. And in so doing, I think he taught Israelis and he taught us this profound lesson that rights belong inherently to individuals. They're a natural right of individuals that they possess simply by virtue of being part of the human race. They're not a gift of government. Government can protect rights. Some governments protect rights clearly better than others, but governments can't grant rights. In fact, rights are inherent natural rights that belong to individuals. So these, I think, are the three pillars of Israel's declaration. There's many other interesting aspects which we could discuss if you'd like, but these are its pillars. Israel is to be a Jewish state capaciously defined, as I'm calling it, a state of rights, a liberal state, such as we recognize in the great liberal states that emerged in the 19th and defeated the totalitarianism in the 20th century. Israel is going to be and aspire to be one of those. And finally, it's going to be a strong state, a sovereign state, which accepts the burdens, responsibilities, and gifts of sovereignty, but will have a state with a mission. Like the United States, it's not going to be simply in pursuit of power, although the pursuit of power and strength is indispensable. It'll be a state designed to protect both its Jewish character and its free character. And when you frame the declaration like that, it's understandable, I think, why people are turning to it in these contested times. Israel famously, as I said at the outset, has no constitution. In fact, Israel's Declaration of Independence is the only text from 1948, from Israel's founding period, that speaks foundationally about foundational matters. And there are all kinds of ways to criticize it. Perhaps, I have some criticism, perhaps you have criticism too, but I think its emphasis is really correct. What else could Israel be but, a free state, a Jewish state, and a strong state? It has to aspire, I think, to balance all of those elements. Can't simply be a free state without a Jewish state. If that's so, like, why would you possibly accept to live in this, in this hostile climate, surrounded by enemies? Thank God many are becoming friends in recent years. But if it's simply if it doesn't define itself in terms of some ethical mission, what's the point? On the other hand, how could you think of a Jewish ethical mission it doesn't respect the rights of all people, which doesn't aspire to have equality before the law and the like? And finally, how can we exist? And we were taught terrible lessons in the 20th century, what it means to live without a state, without the protection of a state, without an army, without economic strength, without development, without possibility of, as Mirage does so much to advance, of turning scientific wisdom into technological innovation. We need a state for us to protect and enhance any of the good things which we can create. So I think when you frame it this way, it really is a text that really both sides in the current Israeli political conflict can turn to. It certainly doesn't answer every question we might have, but I think it can set the terms constructively for the debate we need to have as we negotiate the serious challenges we have in Israel, and in fact could actually provide some lessons for Americans and others as we have these contentious battles about principles in our politics. Thank you. So I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions or take any comments.
Thank you, Neil. I appreciate that. And like you said, let's absolutely open up for Q&A.
Neil, hi, it's Ishai Isaac speaking.
Hi.
Number one, thank you very much. It was very interesting. The other thing is, I'm not sure that I was completely following I feel that there's some maybe a potential differences in the understanding or the interpretation of the meaning of what is a Jewish state. And because different people, especially in Israel, see a Jewish state in a different form, that we, of course, all respect everybody else's opinion as part, as you said, as the principal concept of the Israeli Jewish and free and so on. But still, some of the people see a significant conflict between a free country or a free Israeli state that is also Jewish. Because if it's Jewish, it can't be free, because you are not allowed to transfer and transport and move on Saturdays and Shabbat, because it's against the Jewish beliefs, or some of the Jewish beliefs in it more firmly. It's there's a lot of other restrictions of what you can eat and what you can't eat. So you got the point. So I'm not sure that I was completely following how you can see that there is no inherent conflict in the Israeli declaration. And then what is coming first? Is it more Jewish or more democratic or more equal? And what exactly that means too?
Yishai, that's amazing. Thank you so much for the question. You really put your like, unsurprisingly, you put your, you know, nail on the head as the most decisive issue here. So that's absolutely right. And to say that there is no conflict, I hope I didn't. If I said there was no conflict, I certainly misspoke. What I mean to, I think to say is that there's going to be there certainly is going to be conflict, and we see that all the time, right? And one virtue, I think, of the way that Ben Gurion framed this in the declaration is that each side is going to be somewhat dissatisfied. When you have a political document and, like, you know, both sides are like somewhat dissatisfied but not like completely turned out, then you've done pretty well, right? The secular are, you know, discontented because there are all these, you know, annoying regulations. As you said, you know, things are closed on, you know, things are closed on Shabbat. You know, there are all kinds of inconveniences in that respect, inconveniences you wouldn't have in say other countries at the moment. You know, there are no buses. Good luck, you know, if you rely on public transportation, good luck trying to get somewhere on a Saturday in Israel. So that's an inconvenience. On the other side, religious people complain that you know, the state is, you know, breaking. It's all the time. It's breaking, you know, this or that Jewish law, right? You know, there's so much, you know, it's like, you know, it's not following Jewish law. It's permitting all these kinds of, you know, liberal expressions of things. There's public atheism. There are all these kinds of things, which do not fulfill some people's dreams of a Jewish state. So clearly there are tensions there, and neither side gets what they want. But I think both sides get like quite a lot of what they want. And these, you could say, it's like, yeah, there are inconveniences, but also like that's pretty good. And at different times, you know, one could argue today, and I'm sure each of us have our opinions on this, like the balance needs to be, you know, fixed a little more. Maybe it's tending in one way, a certain direction. Maybe at the beginning of the state there was too much anti-religious oppression, and so it had to be recalibrated. Maybe now it's the reverse. There's like, you know, one could certainly make that claim with, you know, yeshiva students who aren't working. Maybe it needs to be recalibrated in the other way at this moment. But I think that balance and trying to create a, you know, constructive tension, or like at least a livable tension, is still a worthy goal. And Ben Gurion very much was well aware of this. He said, look, we can't resolve this. This is why he framed the Jewish state question this way. We're not going to resolve this. Let's say it's related to Jewish ideas, Jewish ethics are somehow going to be there. And then as we go along, prudent business people, prudent politicians will figure out how to manage this together. So I think, you know, you hit your nail on the head. Clearly, there are some problems in that domain today, but I think there's a lot both in the Jewish tradition and in the liberal tradition to help us here, right? You know, I say this whenever I'm asked. You know, the Jewish, rightly understood, is like pretty friendly to the liberal tradition, is pretty friendly to rights of conscience, to rights of you know, rights of, you know, political internal rights, you know, rights as we understand them in the West, right? Yeah, it's not going to be like America in this sense, but you know, I think that we need to draw out that tradition in Judaism. And similarly with the liberal tradition, we have a role for saying that liberalism itself is best when these like ethical principles are somehow there, right? Somehow involved without controlling us, but somehow there and are to be understood and debated together. That's at least Ben-Gurion. That's how he always framed the issue in this way. Two Jews, three opinions. And I think living with this kind of pluralism, sometimes frustrating, sometimes constructive, is the way forward.
Number one, thank you very much. But would be the next question is, somebody needs to fill those lacunes. Somebody needs what are the tools actually to find exactly that right balance, and who's authorized and should take the lead and fill it up with content and a firm understanding of what is right and what is wrong, or not right and wrong, but what is acceptable under that society or community that gather together in the state of Israel under this declaration statement. You still need to fill it up and find the right balance and have everybody understand what the rules are and what the boundaries are. And that's exactly, by the way, where the conflict now is in Israel, when one or some part of the population think that the politicians needs to do something that they were not able to do in so many years, and others believe that the court system should do it. And that conflict brings, based exactly on the declaration, because of its that it gives you a general directions of stuff that needs to be considered, but not necessarily the solutions and the toolbox that should be used in order to put all that stuff together. And by the way, Ben-Gurion was trying at the beginning to set a constitution with the People's Committee and so on, but even then it didn't work. So we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Amazing. Two outstanding questions. The subject of my next book, provisionally titled Constitution of Israel. But who decides, who sets the rules of the game? If I'm sort of I'm lukewarm on this issue. I think maybe you can envision a potential constitutional moment at some point. Perhaps it's possible, but I'm actually what Ben-Gurion would say in later 50s and 60s. He would say we're too diverse. The effort to simply for one side, because we have so much disagreement on fundamental matters, it's better to just handle that at the level of principles in the form of parliamentary government, rather than setting this down in writing in a constitution. He liked the British model in this sense. And I tend to agree with the later Ben-Gurion on that it'd be the effort to actually draft a constitution might tear the country apart. So it's better. It's not great. There were many mistakes that were made in 1948, but sometimes not great is better than some alternatives they can bring up by trying to make decisive constitutional reform. But I'm open to this, right? I'm open to, I've seen in my inbox many different constitutional proposals over the past 10 months, and some of them have been interesting. So we'll see.
Do we have any other additional questions? All right. Well, Neil, on behalf of Paul Merage and Michelle Merage, the Merage Institute, thank you so much for taking the time to enlighten our Merage tribe. And thank you everyone for joining us. Until next week. Thank you.
Thank you.